So it is Sunday, the 13th of May, 2018, and I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, engaged in my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse. And the Mother's Day theme today is how, okay, this guy's looking at the chalk slogan. The theme is how Unitarian Universalist mothers participate in the cover-up of child abuse. So we're talking about how Unitarian Universalist mothers participate in the cover-up of child abuse committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, and Unitarian Universalist lay leaders, to say nothing of other child abuse cover-up by Unitarian Universalist mothers. But that's it. That's the narrowed down specific theme of my protest for Mother's Day 2018. It's also the 5th anniversary of a little run-in I had with 2 female SPVM police officers who tried to shut down my protest with threats of a ticket. And that was an interesting conversation we had back in 2013, which is available on YouTube. You can see the complete video of our philosophical discussion of Mother's Day 2013. Just search, Mother's Day SPVM Unitarian in Google or YouTube, and you'll find the video in question. Anyhow, so I don't know whether or not these 2 female SPVM police officers were mothers or not, but I'm assuming that they could well be. They're not Unitarians, but they are SPVM police officers, and when SPVM police officers try to shut down my protest against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse, which includes clergy abuse of children, and indeed clergy sexual abuse of children, indeed pedophilia and rape committed by some Unitarian Universalist ministers, to say nothing of Sunday school teachers, well then these SPVM police officers are essentially aiding and abetting Unitarian Universalist cover-up of clergy abuse. When they try to suppress my Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guaranteed right to engage in peaceful public protest against clergy abuse, well, they're effectively aiding and abetting Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse cover-up efforts. So yeah, that's also part of today's theme, not just how Unitarian mothers, say nothing of Unitarian fathers, maybe Father's Day I'll have chalk slogans saying Unitarian fathers cover up child abuse. To say nothing of actually participate in it, but that's another story. But yeah, let's talk about a Unitarian father who participated in child abuse. Indeed, what the Unitarian Universalist Association's Canadian attorney, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, described as such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. We'll talk about Richard Buell, the First Parish Norwell in Massachusetts. Richard Buell was a Unitarian Universalist father who was charged, tried, and convicted of the rape, indeed the forcible rape, of preteen girls, including a female family member, where if you calculate the age difference between Richard Buell, when the times that the rapes took place, and the age of the female family member, which was 12 or younger, this was almost certainly a granddaughter or possibly a grandniece. It was not a daughter, which does not mean to say that Richard Buell did not, in fact, also rape his daughters. there is evidence which strongly suggests that Richard Buell did in fact rape his own daughters as well. But what happened is, they did not report this incestuous rape, for obvious reasons, being afraid and so on. But nonetheless, what happened is the statute of limitations ran out. So by the time Richard Buell's own daughters actually did want to have him charged with pedophilia and rape of themselves, they were unable to do so because of the statute of limitations that ran out. But what did happen is that it came to light that Richard Buell had raped, as I said, probably a granddaughter or grandniece, clearly a female family member who was 12 years old or younger, at a time when he was in his mid to late 50s, if I remember the information correctly. So it's clear that we're talking about something like a granddaughter or grandniece, not an actual daughter in this particular case. So he was also charged, tried, and convicted of raping a neighbor's daughter. So that's essentially what happened. At some point, accusations were brought against Richard Buell of First Parish Norwell, and he was charged, tried, and convicted, and sentenced to a jail term. In fact, I believe he died while incarcerated. I don't think he was ever released from jail, because by the time he was charged, tried, and convicted, I think he was in his 70s, some like 20 years later or something. Anyhow, we shall just continue circulating here. But yeah, so this is a Unitarian Universalist father who was charged, tried, and convicted of child abuse in the form of sexual abuse of children, and then the worst kind of sexual abuse of children, specifically forcible rape. Here's where the Unitarian Universalist mother comes into the picture, or at least the female Unitarian Universalist, at least one of whom I know is not a mother, but another one might be. In June of 2012, as I have mentioned previously, the Unitarian Universalist Association hired Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors defamation lawyer Maitre Marc-André Coulombe to falsely accuse me of violating Canada's blasphemy law in legal bullying that was clearly intended to intimidate me into removing my blog posts that told the readily verifiable truth about Richard Buell and also Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, who had been charged, tried, and convicted of the forcible rape and indeed the unnatural rape of teenage Tibetan refugees. But that's another story. Right now we're concentrating on Richard Buell, Unitarian Universalist father, convicted of raping a female family member who was no older than 12 years old, clearly a child, and almost certainly he raped his own daughters based on the evidence, circumstantial evidence at least, testimony, I believe, of his own daughters. In any case, getting back to things, no question, Richard Buell was convicted of the forcible rape of a 12 or younger female family member. And then, some years later, in 2012, a Unitarian Universalist woman by the name of Kathleen K. Montgomery hired Stikeman Elliott to falsely accuse me of blasphemous libel in an effort to conceal that fact. So clearly Kathleen K. Montgomery is guilty of trying to cover up the fact that Richard Buell raped very young children. But another Unitarian Universalist involved in this is Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein. Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein was the minister of First Parish Norwell when Richard Buell was charged, tried, and convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, if I can borrow a choice phrase from Maitre Marc-André Coulomb. And it's interesting because what happened is I didn't know about it back in 2006. I did not know about the Richard Buell case in 2006. But what happened is that Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, who goes by the pseudonym Peace Bang on the internet and had a Peace Bang blog at the time, still has a Peace Bang blog, but hosted on a different site. She blogged about Roman Catholic child sex abuse. She blogged specifically about the case of Mark Foley, a member of Congress, who had said that he was a victim of fondling by a Roman Catholic priest when he was a child. But he was also, this was actually sort of his excuse for his own sexual misconduct, as it were. So in any case, so here's Peace Bang, Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, blogging about, why is it, why does this happen in the Catholic Church? What is it? She actually specifically asked, what is it about Catholicism that causes this sexual abuse of children and so on, as if, the actual fact of being Catholic was, somehow part of the problem. And, I knew about the case of Reverend Mac Mitchell, knew of some other cases where Unitarian Universalist ministers had been convicted of child sex abuse. So I just commented and said, hey, what about the Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, and he raped teenage Tibetan refugees. His clergy sex abuse was far worse than what Mark Foley's talking about. Mark Foley was only talking about fondling by a Roman Catholic priest. I think there's a difference between fondling and forcible rape, and indeed unnatural rape, also known as sodomy. So what about this? And does Unitarian Universalism explain this? Is there something about Unitarian Universalism that causes this to happen? And instead of engaging and discussing and so on, Reverend Victoria Weinstein, who I did not know the identity of at the time, I just knew this pseudonymous, anonymous Peace Bang blog. It was not linked to Victoria Weinstein at the time, at least in my mind. I didn't know that she was the author. She just memory holed everything. She just deleted all of my comments and hid it. So she participated in hiding the fact that Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell was charged, tried, and convicted of the forcible rape of children, specifically teenage Tibetan refugees. And it was in fact as a result of this, concealing of child sex abuse committed by a Unitarian Universalist minister and ministers, because I did speak about some other cases, although I did not identify the ministers involved, partly because I literally can't. I know that certain Unitarian Universalist ministers have committed pedophilia, specifically, sexual abuse of very young children, but their names are not known, not all of them anyway. I mean, so that's it. I knew of some cases where clearly there had been sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers, but some of these cases, the names of the ministers were not known. So in any case, as a result of the fact that Peace Bang, who I did not know to be Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein at the time, deleted, memory hold all of my comments, basically hiding Reverend Mac Wallace's child sex abuse, hiding the other, pedophilia committed by other unnamed Unitarian Universalist ministers, or as I sometimes like to say, unmentionable Unitarian Universalist ministers. I thought, no, this is just too much. I mean, Peace Bang was already guilty of a variety of other abuses and so on. She's a very verbally and psychologically abusive person, at least on the internet, constantly insulting and defaming people. I said, that's enough of this, I said, I'm going to try and find out who Peace Bang is. And it was actually not that difficult. Somebody who clearly knew who Peace Bang was, in one of the comments on Peace Bang's blog, identified her as Victoria. So I just ran a search on Victoria, Rev Victoria, Unitarian, and Reverend Victoria Weinstein came up as one of the suspects, if not the only suspect. And so I thought, oh, maybe it's Reverend Victoria Weinstein. And so I went to the website of First Parish Norwell, to which Reverend Victoria Weinstein ministered to. And I just looked for more evidence, trying to find evidence that would show that Peace Bang was in fact Reverend Victoria Weinstein, so I could out her. And I came across the church newsletter, a very recent church newsletter, in which there was a notice about how Reverend Deborah Pope Lance was presiding over a special meeting regarding the recent conviction of Richard Buell. Now, this notice was very carefully worded. It said nothing about pedophilia and rape or child sex abuse or anything. It simply spoke about how Richard Buell had been recently convicted of a crime, obviously, and how Reverend Deborah Pope Lance was going to have a meeting to help the congregation to deal with this. Now, Reverend Deborah Pope Lance is one of the Unitarian Universalist ministers who